This past week, Pat Kelsey's squad proved why the Louisville Cardinals are one of the best teams in the ACC.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into this Monday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. This is my fifth year covering the University of Louisville, third year hosting this show. And I want to take the time to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the show is free and available on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. Today's episode of the show brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. This past week, Pat Kelsey's team went 2-0 in a key stretch of games, victories over Clemson and Pittsburgh. The Cardinals' winning streak is now up to 6, and Pat Kelsey's squad proving why the Cardinals are one of the best teams in the ACC. We'll explain why coming up shortly. We'll discuss the quad one victory at Pittsburgh. Back and forth game on Saturday. The Cardinals were able to prevail. And I also think it's time to highlight the team's ability to close out games and how it has been instrumental during this winning streak and how it's going to help this team moving forward throughout the remainder of the season. So the vibes are high. 2-0 in a really important week. 10-point win against Clemson, 4-point win on the road against Pittsburgh, picking up a quad one victory on Saturday, quad two victory on Tuesday. And look, I understand that, the quad wins change depending on how teams perform, but overall, pretty good wins. Louisville is on a 6-game winning streak, and I remember going on record about this time last week suggesting that this was the most important week remaining on the schedule because of the opportunities at hand. You're going up against what are proclaimed to be or perceived to be two of the top 3, 4, 5 teams in the conference. You had opportunities to get some quad two, quad one wins, which aren't really all that abundant as we head through the last 14 games of the season now. So it was critical that you took advantage of the situation. And I said that if Louisville went 1-1, if they split the 2 games, then I was going to be okay. I mean, it wasn't going to be disastrous if you were to lose one of Clemson or Pittsburgh. But as long as you won the other one, I felt like Louisville was in a good spot to still capitalize on the momentum, to still build up their tournament resume and whatnot. But what did they do? They went out and they won both games. And they did so really not shooting the greatest, but the effort was there, the toughness, the clutch gene down the stretch. I mean, this Louisville team has continued to get better and better as the season has gone on. And the fan base are believers, right? But now you're starting to see that national narrative continue to shift. The pendulum is continuing to swing, and you went to talk about this team as well. I mean, Pat Kelsey's going to have this team good in a couple of years to hold on now. Joel Berry, former North Carolina point guard, really good college player, said on the ACC network on Saturday evening that the Cardinals were the second best team in the ACC. And I agreed with that sentiment. I've said that for the past couple of days now. But I think that it is time to start calling it how it is, and that is that Louisville is one of the best teams in the ACC. And they're not on Duke level, in my opinion. I mean, Duke right now is a complete buzzsaw. I mean, John Shire's team is playing tremendously well. There might not be a team outside of Auburn that's playing better at this current moment. I mean, they have early non-con losses to Kansas and Kentucky, but since then they played extremely good. They're 6-0 in conference play. But even if Duke is the number one team, which at this point looks like they are, barring something absolutely unseen, that still opens up the opportunity for 3 other spots in the top 4. And that's been my goal. And I've been pretty vocal about that. Is I think that Louisville can, and I want Louisville to be a top 4 team in the conference at the end of the year. I want the Cardinals to get a double bye in the conference tournament. And I think that it's completely possible. But I also understood that to get there, you were going to have to beat some of those teams that might be projected to beat you, teams that you might not match up well against. And what have they done? Well, I think, truthfully, they played 3 of those teams so far. They played Clemson, they played Pittsburgh, and they played North Carolina. And what have they done? They have beaten all 3. 2 of those 3 by double digits. And the 2 of the 3 that they've beaten by double digits, they won't have to play again for the remainder of the season. And I think that that's a key point, because you look at the remainder of this ACC schedule, and February is a ton of road games. Seemingly, Louisville plays better on the road anyway. But we're not going to discuss that at the moment. Not having to play North Carolina and Clemson, I think, is going to be beneficial to the Cardinals' ACC standing. But standings right now, I mean, look, you have 14 games remaining. You can't go on autopilot. Just because I'm saying that Louisville is one of the best teams in the ACC doesn't mean that you can kind of, take that to the bank and ride off into the sunset and get a double bye. That's not how it's going to happen. And obviously that's not how Pat Kelsey and company are treating this. Every game is extremely important, as it should be. That's how sports should be treated. But currently Louisville is tied for second in the conference at 5-1 in league play. Clemson is the other team that's 5-1. Wake Forest and North Carolina are both 4-1. You have Pittsburgh, SMU, and Stanford at 3-2. The rest of the teams either have 3, 4, or if you're Miami, you have 5 losses and you are 0-5. So these first 4 games, if you remember, first of all, if you tune into Locked on Louisville regularly, I really do appreciate it. It means a ton. But if you have tuned in regularly to Locked on Louisville, if you've tuned into Mondays with Dalton Pence on Big X Sports Radio, I feel like I am almost a broken record by suggesting that we were going to learn a lot about this team in the first 4 games of the month of January, because you're on the road at Virginia, you host North Carolina, you host Clemson, and you're on the road at Pittsburgh. 4 games that I feel like are a pretty justifiable measuring stick for where the team currently is and how you can project this team to be going into the, the final, 2 months, let's call it 2 months of the season. And currently, after going 4-0 and beating Florida State on the road by double digits right before the end of 2024, I just feel like you can't talk about the top teams in the ACC without talking about Louisville, because, you look at the rest of the teams. Well, Clemson, Louisville's a better team than Clemson. North Carolina, Louisville beat North Carolina. Pittsburgh, Louisville went on the road to beat Pittsburgh. The only other teams maybe you throw into that conversation, Wake Forest and SMU. Wake Forest is 12-4. They're 4-1 in conference play. The only conference loss was to Clemson. The other 4 conference games that they've won: Boston College, NC State, Syracuse, and Miami. Most of those teams are at the bottom. Well, actually, no. All those teams are at the bottom of conference play. So Louisville not only has a better conference record, but they've beaten better teams. And then you also have SMU, who's 12-4, 3-2 in conference play. They've lost 2 out of their last 3. They lost to Duke by 27. They lost to North Carolina by 15. And then they beat Georgia Tech. Sure, they beat Virginia as well. And I'm trying to remember who that last conference win was to. Boston College. To beat Boston College. Maybe you say SMU, Louisville will have to take on the Mustangs on the road. But currently, I just don't know how you can make the case. Yes, Duke is the best team in the ACC, but Louisville is one of the best teams in the ACC. And that's why I've said, I fully have bought into the possibility that this team could end up in the top 4. And part of that was, I will say the majority of that was my thoughts on this Cardinals team. And I didn't really expect the ACC to be as down as it is. And I know that the rebuttal to this would be like, well, the ACC is not all that good. Of course, they're one of the best teams in conference play. The ACC might not be the SEC or the Big 12, but I mean, it's still a respectable conference. You still have teams that, I mean, it feels like every year we talk about, well, SEC or the Big 12 is the best, and who has the teams that are making the runs? The ACC has teams that are making the runs. I mean, NC State last year making the run, up into the Final Four. I mean, for me, it's just, I mean, I don't know. You see what I'm saying? I mean, if you're just one of those people that will discredit, I mean, this is year one of a new coach with a brand new team. I'm going to, find the victories where they are. So Louisville, one of the best teams in the ACC, and I feel like they really put the stamp of approval on that with the victory on the road on Saturday against Pittsburgh. A quad one victory, really significant result for the Cardinals. They went back and forth, gave me big time Big East vibes. And we'll explain why when we come back on this Monday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes are dealing with piles of paperwork and frustrating forms, and then waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. That was the past. Now Taxes is easily uploading your forms to a TurboTax expert who's matched to your unique tax situation. An expert who's backed by the latest technology, which cross-checks millions of data points for 100% accuracy. While they work on your taxes, you get real-time updates on their progress, and you get the most money back guaranteed, all while you go about your day. No stressing, no worrying, no waiting. Now, this is Taxes Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Cardinal fans, I mentioned this late last week, but I wanted to remind you that there is going to be a little bit of a shift in scheduling for programs this week. Granted, January is the most hectic and wild month for my day job. I will be out of town at a conference for the majority of this week. This episode is pre-recorded on Sunday. The Tuesday episode is pre-recorded on Sunday. So if something happens on Monday or Tuesday, just know that obviously there's not going to be any talk about that until later on in the week. There won't be an episode on Wednesday. There probably won't be one on Thursday. There's a small chance there will be. If there is, it will be later on in the evening or at nighttime, but there will be an episode on Friday for certain. And, I apologize for the inconvenience and the lack of programming, but that's why I wanted to at least have some episodes discussing the Pittsburgh game, some other things with the basketball team, and we're going to preview the Syracuse matchup tomorrow as well. So appreciate your all's patience and understanding. Saturday was it was wild. Mike Rutherford tweeted this out, and I couldn't have agreed more with it. Is you're sort of riding on whether or not Louisville wins or loses to determine whether your day's ruined or not, or if your day's having a really good start. And it's so refreshing to see that Louisville basketball is back to that point. Louisville went on the road on Saturday and played a really quality opponent. Pittsburgh is a good team. They got back to fully healthy with Damian Dunn. Now, he returned against Duke, but this was his second game back from a thumb injury that had sidelined him for over a month. And Pittsburgh on the road, top 20 team in the net, quad one victory on the line for Pat Kelsey's team. And it started out pretty rough. I mean, Pittsburgh went on a run, and then Louisville immediately answered it. And they were able to kind of go back and forth. I was a little bit worried. The Cardinals had a 3-point lead with a chance to end the first half. Terrence Edwards threw a pretty bad pass, and turned the ball over. Chucky Hepburn picked up a cheap second foul and sent Jalen Lowe to the line to cut the halftime deficit to 1. Pittsburgh had all the momentum, and I was kind of worried. And it just was a game of runs in the second half. I mean, whenever Louisville tried to go on a run, Pittsburgh answered, and vice versa. And you got down to the end of the second half where the Cardinals had found themselves trailing by 5 at certain points, but they were able to clutch up, get some key buckets, and make it to where, they were still in the game. I mean, Louisville had a 72-67 lead with 4 minutes to go. Pittsburgh ended up making a couple of big-time buckets, and they were basically just continuing to trade buckets back and forth. Pittsburgh took a 73-72 lead on a Zach Austin 3. Reyne Smith made a 3-pointer, and then he made a jumper, and then he made another 3-pointer. And, I mean, his 8-0 run was incredible. Reyne Smith was electric on Saturday. He made just so many big-time shots. Like, you look at the box score, and he had a game-high 25 points on 9 of 15 shooting, 7 of 11 from three-point land. And it feels like even that doesn't really give full credit to what he did on Saturday. Not only did he make those shots, but he made them in clutch time. When Pittsburgh knew who Louisville was trying to get the ball to, what happened? He came off of a screen, got the ball from about 30 feet away, and just sidestepped to the left and threw up a gorgeous rainbow 3-pointer that went in. He had a mid-range jumper, sort of one of those where he was driving to the lane, kind of put that foot down, stopped around the free throw line, and hit a key jumper. And then he hit another 3-pointer. He hit one where he was fading off into the corner. If you remember, it's kind of like that Steve Kerr meme where Steph Curry's doing all these dribble moves. This was probably back in 2015 against the Clippers, where he's dribbling in and out, not even looking at anywhere or the basket. And then all of a sudden, Curry just steps back and throws up what seems to be a prayer from the 3-point line. And Steve Kerr's like, he's got his hands up, and then he just throws his hands down in disbelief, and he just kind of chuckles to himself. And that's kind of what, those Reyne Smith 3-pointers from the corners like. He's like, what are you doing? Okay, do it again. Keep doing that. It's like he catches the ball, and it's like that's how you know he's just a phenomenal shooter, is that he's going up before his feet ever seem to be touching the floor. And Reyne Smith was incredible. And this was his best performance as a Louisville Cardinal, going on the road and getting a quad 1 victory, and him being the catalyst for the offensive movement. I mean, that's huge. To be able to make those key plays down the stretch and continue to battle. This had all of the makings of an old-time, vintage Big East basketball game, and I appreciated that so much. Now, what I didn't appreciate was the officiating, picking and choosing the moments on when to let this be a physical game and when to call pretty interesting foul calls, let's put it that way. Chucky Hepburn, his second and third foul, I'm like, that's not a foul. And then you watch guys go down and get hacked. And look, I'm okay if you call it one way or the other, but all I ask for, and I think all anyone ever asks for, is just consistency on that end. If you're going to let them play physical, let them play. Be consistent. But if you're going to, make it a point of emphasis, say, you know what, we're not going to let you play all that physical, then call it that way from the beginning so we know what to expect. And if teams don't adjust, then that's on them. Pittsburgh, it felt like played the we're going to play as physical as we can, and they can't call everything type defense. Kind of reminds me of a low-key Louisville 2013 defense, although not to that an extent to where they had to change the way they call fouls after that tournament run. But really good win. And Chucky Hepburn had some big-time moments. Louisville didn't really shoot the ball that well from the free throw line, 7 of 15. They missed over 10 layups. They shot 37% from 3, which was better considering they started 1 of 10 from 3. They shot 45% or 46% from deep. But if you're telling me that Louisville was going to go on the road and get a quad one victory over a team that shot 48% from three and 91% from the free throw line on 22 attempts from the charity stripe, I would have said probably not all that likely. So to be able to get this victory in the manner in which you did, in which I think you put your toughness and commitment and just overall clutch gene on display for the rest of the country to see, this was the opportunity for you to make a statement, like I said, before the game. And you did. I felt like you made a big time statement. One thing that you can look back at from this 6-game winning streak currently is the team's ability to clutch up and close out games and play their best basketball when it's needed. It's time we have a discussion about that. And we will when we come back on this Monday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Attending the new 12-team college football playoff games were an incredible experience for all those that were able to get to those games. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for events like that even easier. If you're looking to get to the national championship game, it filters out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. If you're a Louisville fan, chances are you're not going to go to Atlanta to watch Notre Dame and Ohio State, but you can go to the KFC Yum Center next Saturday to watch Louisville take on Virginia at noon in the second game of that series so far in this season. And if you utilize Game Time, you'll be able to see all the deals and the great value for the seats that they have. The super deal in particular stood out as the best value for me. I love that I could see the seat views before buying all of the options, and the app shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. The on-time ticket delivery and the lowest price guarantee gave me complete peace of mind in the past, and it can in the future on Louisville's next home game. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Cardinal fans, thanks again for making us your first listen of the day. Tomorrow's show, again, like I said, it's a pre-recorded show from Sunday. We're going to talk about why Pat Kelsey has to be a serious National Coach of the Year candidate. We will preview the Syracuse matchup, and we will have a weekly mailbag answering some key questions. So be sure to tune into the Tuesday episode as well. Thanks again for tuning in to today's, but we're not done yet. I feel like it's time, after watching the team do what they did against Clemson and close out the game against Pittsburgh, it's time to highlight this squad's ability to close out games, because it doesn't get talked about enough. Like, it gets brought up, but it doesn't get analyzed in the way in which it should. Like, this team has gotten better and better to where I don't even like to talk about this team like it's the same one we saw back in late November, early December. Like, after the Kentucky game, you look to the game against Florida State. It was a game that went back and forth. Florida State had an answer for everything that Louisville did. And the Cardinals were able to, this was a, it was a 6-point game with about 6 minutes to go. And Louisville didn't look back. They were able to push the lead to double digits and make the plays necessary to win the games. Eastern Kentucky, a little bit different. The Colonels were just sticking around in the second half. Louisville allowed them to stay around, and the Colonels ended up taking the lead, made some clutch plays in the back half of the last TV timeout, and found themselves up 1 at the KFC Yum Center with a minute to go. Noah Waterman hitting the clutch layup to win the game. And then you turn your attention to 2025. North Carolina. It was a 1-point game going into the final TV timeout, and Louisville went on a double-digit run to win that game by 13 points. The defense was suffocating. They forced multiple tough shots. They got good offense. They made their free throw shots and won that game by double digits. Virginia, back and forth contest, sort of like Florida State, but more close than comfort. I look at this, and it was a 7-point game with 7 minutes to go, and the Cardinals just didn't look back. They made the key winning plays down the stretch, and you start to see the theme of what I'm talking about, right? It's like the games are close, and then Louisville is able to play their best basketball. Clemson, this one was a rough one. Louisville had a double-digit lead in the second half of this game, and the Tigers were just able to get closer and closer and closer until finally they cut the lead to 1, and Louisville was then able to go on a run at the end of the second half. And the last 10 minutes of the game is when Louisville plays their best basketball. Pittsburgh was by far the toughest ACC matchup so far, and back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. But what happened? Louisville was able to get some key buckets, make some free throws, and play really good defense. And I know that maybe that sounds kind of boring, just reiterating what you all already know, like going in. It's like, okay, Dalton, I understand what happened in these games. But do you see the trend is what I'm asking. Do you see the continuity and this becoming something, maybe, I mean, if it's a 1 to 2 game sample size, sure, maybe then you can kind of write it off as just natural randomness of the sport of basketball. But 6 games in a row. And it also happened against West Virginia, I might add. 6 games in a row to where you are playing your best basketball. Let's call it, after the under 8 timeout in the second half is when Pat Kelsey's team's like, okay, let's kick it into high gear and let's push towards the final horn and let's get a victory. And you can look at this and suggest that if they don't make those runs in the Florida State game or the Virginia game, maybe it's different. If they don't go on that run in the final 4 minutes against North Carolina, that could be different. If they don't clutch up against Pittsburgh, that could be different. If you don't go on the run against Clemson in the last 9 minutes, it could be different. So while it might seem kind of silly to point this out, how can you not have a discussion about it? Because we're talking about the ingredients of the winning streak. Like, what is making Louisville winning, or what is making Louisville going on this winning streak? What is making them go on this winning streak? Guys stepping up. The past 5 games before this one, 5 different leading scorers, and Reyne Smith hadn't been the leading scorer for a couple of games. James Scott's progression. Chucky Hepburn being one of the best guards in the ACC. Hadley scoring 32 points against Clemson. Great defense throughout. And then you have this, the ability to close out games. And against Pittsburgh, where Jalen Lowe seemingly, I don't think he missed a single free throw. I mean, he had it was something wild. 13 to 13 from the free throw line. You got Damian Dunn hitting clutch 3 after clutch 3. Ishmael Leggett making big-time shots. Zach Austin doing the same. And what happens? Reyne Smith clutches up. Team plays clutch defense. Louisville's won 6 straight games. When we come back on tomorrow's show, we're going to talk about how Pat Kelsey is a serious National Coach of the Year candidate. We're going to preview the upcoming, I will call it, trap game on the road at Syracuse. We'll also answer some questions in the weekly mailbag. Until then, you're listening to the Locked On Louisville podcast. We'll see you right back here